Hello. In this video, we're going to go ahead and continue on in the 3.1 notes. We're going to look at topic 2. In topic 2, we're going to talk about free energy and what that means. And then we're going to look at how in certain processes there's free energy being released, and in certain processes there's free energy being absorbed or required. And so and those are going to be very different processes taking place that we need to talk about. And so let's start with what free energy is so that this slowly starts making sense to you guys. Free energy is, if I read the definition here, it says it measures the portion of a system's energy that can perform work. And so that's not the most helpful definition. Work, you guys can think of work as like movement or motion of some sort. So if you have energy available to turn into movement of some sort or motion, that's free energy. For the purpose of this class, you honestly can think of it as like completely synonymous to potential energy. They're very similar things. Free energy is a type of potential energy. This is energy that something has stored inside of it that is ready to become kinetic energy in some way. Like that's basically what we're talking about here with free energy. The technical difference doesn't matter that much for this class. But just be really familiar with this word free energy. And so you can think of free energy as a good way to think about it is that free energy is measuring a system's instability, how unstable it is, meaning like that thing wants to do something. So if I say something has high free energy, I'm saying that like if something has high free energy, it has a lot of energy waiting to be used to do something. And so we say that that's unstable because sooner or later, like something's going to happen. Like that thing's got a lot of free energy. Like sooner or later, just keep watching. Like something's going to happen. It's going to start moving, or motion's going to be produced. There's work that's going to be done from something that has high free energy. Versus something that has low free energy. Low free energy would be referring to something that is very stable because it's basically very content. It's not going to do anything probably when given the opportunity. It's just gonna stay where it's at. That's something that has low free energy. So low free energy is stable. High free energy is unstable because eventually something's gonna happen. And so we talked about this a little bit actually with water potential. Water potential is a measurement of how much free energy water molecules have. And so if we have water that has high free energy, remember that's water that's like ready to like go, like to move somewhere else when given the opportunity. And so just in general, free energy refers to if given the opportunity, will you do something? That's free. That's what having high free energy means. And so what we're going to look at is we're going to look at different processes and different or chemical reactions or processes that are taking place where you are where we're going to track how is the free energy changing. So from beginning to end, are you ending with more free energy than you started with, or are you ending with less free energy than you started with? And so we're going to be looking at how the free energy changes during different processes. And so that the change in free energy, which the symbol for that is delta G, that's the difference between how much free energy you had at the beginning versus at the end. And to calculate the change in free energy, you take the final amount of free energy and you minus the initial amount of free energy. And always remember that when we find the change in something in science, it's always the final minus the initial. So take how much free energy are you ending with minus how much free energy you started with. And so what will happen, and so, well, I guess this is a good example to point out here. Here's a good example of something with high free energy. This person standing on a diving board. We kind of went through this example in the last video. But if you're standing high up on a diving board on planet Earth where there's gravity, that is very unstable. Like sooner or later, you keep watching this guy, he's going to move. He's going to fall. He's going to go down. He's going to, there's something that's going to happen to him. He has a lot of free energy right now because of his position in our gravitational field. So that would be an example of something with high free energy. Now, once he lands in the water and he's in the water, that's where gravity wants him to be. So at that point, he's gained a lot of stability. Like nothing at that point, what else could happen? Like he's just going to now be there at sea level, okay? Or like something standing on the ground. Nothing too exciting is going to happen. Like they're very stable. They have low free energy. There's not a lot of opportunity for much to happen. But if you're standing up on a cliff, like that's high free energy. There's a lot of instability in that situation and a lot of opportunity for something to happen. And so this process, what we can do is we can look at, okay, overall, how did the free energy change from beginning to end? And we'll see that at the end, he's ending with low free energy, and he started with high free energy. So ending with low free energy, starting with high free energy, that means overall we're losing free energy from beginning to end. He used to have a lot of free energy, not so much anymore. And so that happens a lot, situations where you're losing free energy. And then the opposite is also true, where there's situations where you're gaining free energy. You're going to end with more free energy than you started with. And so basically you can end up with two different things. You can either have a positive change in free energy, where you're overall gaining free energy, like at the end, you're ending with more free energy than you started with. That would be a positive change in free energy. Or you could have a negative change in free energy, where you're ending with less energy than you started with. So overall, that system lost free energy. So that would be a negative change in free energy, because then you'd be taking like a small amount of free energy that you're ending with and minusing a larger amount of free energy that you started with. That would be a negative number. We'll look at lots of examples in a second. But so what we need to know now, let's just start off by learning what spontaneous means. So whenever you have a situation where you are losing free energy, you're going from something with high free energy and you're ending with less free energy than you started with, that's going to be a negative change in free energy. That's going to be a negative delta G. You're ending with less free energy than you started with. You do the final minus initial, you're going to get a negative number, like you lost free energy from beginning to end. Anything that's like that, that's losing free energy, negative delta G, that's going to be a spontaneous process. And so spontaneous means that that's something that is going to happen sooner or later, like eventually. It could be very quickly over milliseconds. It could be very slowly over millions and billions of years. But sooner or later, it will happen. That's what the word spontaneous means. It means like sooner or later in our universe, it's going to happen. And that's because it doesn't require an input of free energy, and instead it actually loses free energy. And that's ultimately what the universe wants. The universe wants things to have less free energy, because then it's more stable. When things have high free energy, the universe doesn't like that. If you have a lot of free energy, the universe hates you because you're really unstable. Something's going to happen. You got a lot of energy stored inside of you. That's not what the universe likes. The universe likes you to get rid of your free energy so that you are now a very low free energy thing in the universe, and that's a lot more stable. And so anything that leads to things losing free energy, that's going to freely happen in our universe without an input of energy. And sooner or later, it will happen. So we say that it's spontaneous. Be careful about the word spontaneous. Sometimes in English, we use the word spontaneous to mean like quickly. In science, spontaneous doesn't necessarily mean quick. It just means sooner or later it will happen on its own. That's what spontaneous means. Now, the opposite of that is when you have a positive delta G. So there are lots of situations where you're actually ending with more free energy than you started with. And so overall, you're gaining free energy from beginning to end. And that's something that the universe does not like. The universe doesn't want things getting more free energy than they started with. The universe wants things to lose free energy. But it is possible for things to gain free energy. It happens all the time during certain processes or chemical reactions or certain things that are happening. You could end with more free energy than you started with, but that's going to require an input of free energy. To end with more free energy than you started with, you had to get that energy from somewhere. So there's going to be an overall input of free energy, and that is going to make it not spontaneous. The fact that it relies on an input of energy means that it's something that would never happen all on its own. And so we say that it's not spontaneous. If it's a positive change in free energy, you could wait 1 billion years. It's not going to happen unless some energy is used to help make it happen. So that's what spontaneous means. And so anything that's losing free energy is spontaneous. Anything that's gaining free energy is not spontaneous. And so here are some examples of some free energy changes. And so you guys can see up here, like the diving board example, we're starting with something with high free energy. Like this is unstable, like because of his position and gravity. Something's going to happen. Like he's in a position here where like there is movement that can be produced. And then once he's in the water, though, that's low free energy. So from beginning to end, he's losing free energy. That would be a spontaneous change. You're going from high free energy to low free energy, unstable to something more stable. Eventually, that will happen. I promise you. You could stare at this guy for the next hour, day, week, year. I don't know. Eventually, he'll end up in the water. Like he will. It's spontaneous. It's going to happen. Same thing with these guys right here. So this is a concentration gradient. You have a concentrated area of this molecule. The universe does not like that. That's high free energy because this is unstable. Like these molecules don't like this. They don't like being all next to each other. They like to be, like we talked about in the last unit, they like to be at equilibrium and diffuse down their concentration gradient. And so right now we have a concentration gradient. And these molecules, they're like ready to move. Like they don't like this concentrated area. They want to move to areas that have a lower concentrated area. So we say that this is high free energy. And then if you let them diffuse, you'll get to equilibrium. At equilibrium, you have very low free energy because now this is stable. Like nothing, at this point, you can stare at these dots and nothing magical is going to happen at this point. Like they're not going to all of a sudden start clumping back into a concentrated area. Like from this point on, they're going to remain equally diffused everywhere, moving around randomly. And so that's low free energy. And again, that's something that will eventually happen. That's a negative change in free energy. You're ending with less free energy than you started with. That's spontaneous. I promise you, if you stare at this chemical, whatever this is, long enough, sooner or later, it'll find a way to get to equilibrium where it's more stable. But right now, there's a lot of free energy. When there's a concentration gradient like this set up, they aren't happy right now. They want to move. And then lastly, another good example is whenever you have large molecules, large complex molecules with lots of atoms bonded together, that's something that's high free energy. That's a lot of chemical energy all kept next to each other, tucked away in this nice, tidy little molecule. Very low entropy. The universe hates it. Like this is high free energy, very organized, a lot of energy all concentrated in one molecule. And so when you have these large complex molecules, that's a lot of free energy. That's very unstable. Large molecules are not very stable. Like eventually, what will actually happen is they'll break down into smaller molecules because small molecules are then going to take all that chemical energy and like spread it out as much as possible. And that's once you have small molecules at that point, they're going to be a lot more stable. So small molecules are way more stable than large complex molecules because of all that energy that's concentrated in those large molecules. And so that is another example of something that's spontaneous. You can take, this is glucose, by the way, and this is carbon dioxide and water. And if you have sugar, glucose, sooner or later, it will become CO2 and water. It does break down naturally over time. If it was just sugar on my table, it actually takes like thousands of years. But it will happen. In our bodies, it happens way more quickly because of enzymes, which we'll talk about soon. But that's again something spontaneous. So high free energy, high free energy, high free energy, low free energy, low free energy, low free energy, spontaneous, spontaneous, spontaneous. That's the key here. And so then I'm going to now tie in these two new words, exergonic and endergonic. So then we could say that so things, we could now classify things as either being exergonic or endergonic, depending if they're gaining or losing free energy. So things that are losing free energy, the technical term for that is exergonic. So exergonic is something that's losing free energy. You're ending with less free energy than you started with. So in exergonic reactions, the products, the chemicals you ended with have less free energy than the chemicals that you started with. And there's energy now being released. It's going somewhere. And the delta G is negative. Like, again, if you took the free energy that these guys have at the end minus the free energy that you initially had, it's going to be a negative number. Like this is less than that. You subtract the two, it's negative. You're losing free energy. So that's exergonic. That's the definition of exergonic, something that's losing free energy. Delta G is negative. And so that's something that's spontaneous. Remember, we just said that is spontaneous. That's something the universe wants to happen. And so down here, I have like this little key. This is also written in your notes. You need to learn immediately that all of these things are synonymous. So when I say something's negative delta G, it means that it's spontaneous, which means that it's exergonic, which means that free energy is being released. Like all of those four terms mean the same thing. They're talking about something that is ending with less free energy than it started with. We could say it's spontaneous. You can say it's exergonic. You can say it has a negative delta G. You can say it releases free energy. It's the same thing. It all means the same thing. So start tying those words together in your head. So cell respiration is a good example of this. In cell respiration, it looks just like this, where the reactants, which are glucose and oxygen, they have a certain amount of free energy, kind of a lot of free energy, because glucose, like I showed you earlier, is a larger, more complex molecule. The universe hates that. There's a lot of energy in that molecule. And so, but the products are CO2 and H2O, which are very small, simple molecules. And so that, in that reaction that goes from glucose and oxygen to CO2 and H2O, that is exergonic. This is actually the negative delta. This is the delta G value. It's negative 686 kilocalories of energy per mole. But the important thing here is that it's negative. It's a negative delta G. So that's exergonic, okay? Which means it's spontaneous, which means free energy is being released in that process. Now, the opposite of this is endergonic. Endergonic is when literally you have the opposite situation. The products, the stuff you're ending with, have more free energy than you started with. So that's a positive change in free energy. If you take this number and you minus that number, it's going to be positive because you're overall gaining free energy. And that's something that's not spontaneous, but we call that endergonic. Endergonic is something that's not spontaneous. It's gaining free energy. Free energy is required for this to happen. And so it's not going to happen magically on its own. It's going to require an input of energy. Photosynthesis is a good example of that because it's the opposite of cell respiration. Plants are taking carbon dioxide and water, these small, simple molecules that the universe likes. They're very stable, small molecules, and putting them together to build more complex, unstable molecules like glucose, which if you guys look at the delta G value, it's positive 686. It's actually the opposite of cell respiration. Again, the important thing here is that it's positive. It's a positive delta G, which means that it's endergonic. It's not spontaneous. It means that it requires free energy. So that's the difference between exergonic and endergonic. And then it talks about activation energy. So I want to bring this up again. It's important for this unit that you guys remember that in all chemical reactions, there is activation energy that is required. So those reactants, those chemicals you're starting with, there is a certain amount of energy they need to absorb to get over this energy barrier before the reaction can actually occur and they can become these new chemicals. So every reaction has an activation energy. And so that's going to dictate a little bit how fast the reaction happens. If something has a really large activation energy, that's going to be something that takes place very slowly. If it has a small activation energy, it's going to be something that happens more easily, more quickly. And so, but it doesn't necessarily have to do with the delta G. So in this situation, you can see from beginning to end, you have less free energy than you started with. So the delta G is negative. This is exergonic. I can tell because you're overall losing free energy. You're ending with less free energy than you started with. And it doesn't really matter what the activation energy is. It doesn't change the fact that this overall will be exergonic, which means that this is spontaneous. And then the activation energy will kind of contribute to, okay, is this going to be something that's fast spontaneous or slow spontaneous? And then when you have an enzyme, so in biology and in cells, there's enzymes controlling all of these reactions. And so we have these special proteins that help speed up these reactions by lowering the activation energy. So all these activation energies for these different reactions, enzymes, when there's an enzyme involved, it actually is going to lower that and make the activation energy less. And by now having less activation energy, there's not going to be as much energy required for the reaction to happen. So it's going to happen a lot more easily, which means it's going to be a lot quicker, a lot faster now that the activation energy is lower. But notice that the enzyme, by having an enzyme or a catalyst, you are not changing the overall delta G. So the delta G is the same. You're still starting and ending with the same amount of free energy, which means the delta G from beginning to end is going to be the same. It's the overall change in delta G is the same with or without the enzyme. The only thing the enzyme changed, and please memorize this if you haven't yet, the only thing the enzyme is doing is lowering the activation energy, which will result in the reaction happening faster. But it doesn't change the fact that it's exergonic or endergonic. Like in this case, it's still exergonic, but now it's going to happen more easily. So that's activation energy, and a quick refresher on enzymes. And then this last slide talks about the importance of energy in living things. I just have some really important bullets listed here about some big concepts the College Board wants to make sure you guys are aware of, and things just to continue to think about as we're learning about energy and biology. It says that life requires highly ordered systems. I talked about this in the previous video, that life, to be a living thing made of cells, it's very organized, very low entropy. It says all living things require a constant input of energy. So to maintain that nice organized system that you guys have, that cells have, it requires a constant input of energy. And that energy input must exceed the energy loss to maintain order and power cellular processes. So you guys are losing energy all the time to your surrounding, but what needs to happen is you need to overall be gaining more energy than you're losing to power all of the things that need to happen inside of you. Which is, again, something we talked about in the last video. And then it says cellular processes that release energy can be coupled with cellular processes that require energy. And we're going to talk about that more in topic 3. So there's lots of things that require energy happening inside of you that need to happen, or you're going to die. And there's things that release energy inside of you. And so your body and cells, and living things, they have found great ways to combine the two, where things are releasing energy, which are going to help power the things that require energy, which is basically going to involve endergonic and exergonic things happening at the same time. We'll talk about that in topic 3. And then if you start losing your highly ordered system, that's going to result in death, right? So if you lose this input of energy and you start becoming, if you have less energy going into your body, you're going to become more and more less ordered, less organized. You have less energy to maintain the organization of your body, and that's going to result in you dying eventually, right? Like that's what happens when organisms start to die. They are just no longer getting enough energy, and then using that energy to maintain that organization the correct way that they're supposed to be doing, and then things stop working very well. And so that's it for these notes. I just want to just finish with one final summary here. Just make sure you guys understand that, think about things in terms of what the universe wants versus what the universe doesn't want. That's what I'm going to encourage you guys to do. So for example, know that the universe, like we talked about entropy and disorder, the universe likes more disorder and more chaos, more entropy, and it doesn't like low entropy. So things that increase disorder, things that are increasing entropy, are usually going to be exergonic. Like those are things that are going to be spontaneous, because that's what the universe wants. If something's accomplishing something the universe wants, it's probably going to be a spontaneous thing that eventually will happen. Like that's just how our universe works. And so things that are increasing in entropy, those are going to usually be exergonic, because that's what the universe wants. Are things that are going from things that are very organized and high free energy, has things that have a lot of free energy, like large molecules, or concentration gradients that are organized and concentrated. The universe doesn't like that. And so anytime you can get to a situation where there's a lot less free energy, a lot more stability, smaller molecules, situations that lead to equilibrium, any of those things are going to be exergonic as well. And so just know the universe likes more entropy, more stability, and lower free energy. Like those are things the universe likes. Okay, they all kind of go hand in hand, and you can learn more about that in a physics class. But for now, just know that yes, things that release energy or have lower free energy, that are more disorganized, more entropy, and more stable, those types of things is what the universe is after. And so anything that leads to that is going to be exergonic, spontaneous. Anyway, we'll talk more about this in class. Good luck on these questions. They're really good examples of things to think through. And that's it.